Hi, a very warm welcome to everyone. We are here today to discuss Salary Trend Survey 2026. I must say that I have a bit of a technical issue, so I'm doing this per phone. So if I suddenly drop off, then Nico will take over.
Yes.
I have a couple of housekeeping rules. First, we are recording this session, and we want to keep it very much active or interactive. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. We will do an extended Q&A session, and we will also present a couple of slides, a couple of topics together with Nico. And yeah, so that's in a nutshell as an intro. And who am I? I'm Igor, sitting here currently in Slovenia, having problems with my internet. But yeah, I run Handpicked Berlin, which is basically now 2 weekly newsletters where I collect interesting news and I pass them over each week. And it's mostly tech related, of course, obviously Berlin focused. And besides tech news events, I also have a lot of news about companies, who is hiring, what the topics are that they are covering, who got funded, etc. And yeah, I'm gonna talk a bit about the salary later, but Nico, would you please also introduce yourself?
Of course. Pleasure to be here. Thanks, Igor. I think the first time that we met is nearly 12 months ago. Since then, we even have been on an event together with Andrea, which was also really great. And that's basically the first time that I heard about Handpick. And since Igor is doing something with salaries, Ravio is basically a compensation management platform, also providing real-time data. We thought it might make sense to combine the two data sets that we're having and derive certain insights from it. And that's basically what we'll walk you through today. My name is Nico. Some of you might know me. I'm a senior AE at Ravio, overlooking the DACH region. So basically trying to scale the product within that region and supporting companies, specifically tech companies. So there's another interference with Igor. And today I'm more than happy to walk you through the numbers. And with that, Igor, I think we're nearly ready to go and kick things off, right?
Yeah, exactly. As we said, we're going to do it very, very interactive. So we have the first poll now where you can participate and you can tell us. I mean, we would like to see who are we talking with. So Nico, maybe you can help me. How do people vote? Yeah, so I see everyone votes already going in.
Can you see it, Igor? Yeah, you can see it, right?
So yeah, let's give it a couple of seconds to see who we are speaking with. Yeah, and by the way, basically, while we are voting, I can talk a bit about what salary trends survey actually is. So when I started this newsletter in 22, I then at some point had a lot of sort of small polls in the newsletter where I was asking people what could be interesting projects. And when I said, okay, what if we do an anonymous salary survey, like the response was massive, right? So I got several hundred responses that let's do it. And then, in fact, I did it. So in 2023, there was the first time that the anonymous salary trend survey was released. And at that time, I got around about 900 responses. And then it grew really nicely. So in next year, we had then 1,100. And then in 2025, then 1,800. And yeah, maybe we got all the votes in. So maybe we can go to the next slide. Yeah, and then basically once this year we had like absolute record numbers, also because I partnered up with Ravio and Factofly, which really helped the project. And we also got amazing engagement from the community. So this year's salary trends is by far the largest ever. It's 4,600 responses. And besides of this regular free report, which we will touch on today, and also the Ravio numbers that we have, we also did additional reports for salaries per roles and also a company benchmark, which will also be available from today onwards on the website. And yeah, let's dive in then into the data a bit. I mean, for sure, most of you already seen this charts. So the first chart is basically a histogram where we see the headline figure, which means that Berlin salary median was 80,000 euros this year, which is roughly 4.5% up year over year. And of course, the question is what is driving this growth? And there is a bit of a crisis going on in the market in Berlin. Everyone is talking about it. So I was actually really surprised that I've seen even increase in salaries this year. And it's not probably because there was not so much raises. So the question is, of course, what could be this increase in this year? And it's very hard when the data is anonymous to identify it properly, but it's most likely related to job switching, because if we know that almost 50% didn't get any raise, it doesn't really numbers don't really come together. So the medium push is probably pushed up by the job switchers. So of course, when people move to a better job, they usually negotiate much better. So I think one other part of why the salaries this year got a bit higher is because also we had much bigger data sets, so 2.5 times larger. So this could be also one of the reasons. And yeah, I personally was surprised. And I don't know, Nico, where does this number 80K, because Berlin was always considered as arm but sexy, or poor but sexy. I was also surprised when I moved from Stuttgart to Berlin. My recruiter at that time told me, oh no, don't expect much. But since I'm doing these surveys, I see that Berlin is actually doing pretty well in terms of salaries, especially in tech, right? So what do we see in terms of Europe then here?
I mean, the short answer to your question is definitely yes. And what we're currently looking at is the median salaries by career track, Berlin versus Europe, and where Berlin tracks closely and where it diverges. On the left-hand side, you can see Berlin, and then obviously Europe-wide. The color coding is on top of the diagram. So it's pretty easy to understand. So what we're looking at is that how the median salary by level tier, executives, managers, professionals, and support staff, compares Berlin against the broader European market. What we can see is that at the executive level, which is the black bar, that Berlin sits nearly on par with Europe. But if we take a closer look to the managers and the professional track, we can see that Berlin is definitely paying a premium. So what that basically means for a company perspective is that in the middle market, from management and ICs, so basically individual contributors in the management, is that a middle manager or IC in Berlin, they're doing noticeably better than their peer in Europe. And if you're a senior executive, you're roughly where the market is right now. One thing worth keeping in mind is that we, from a Ravio perspective, are using a standardized leveling framework. So that differs a bit on how Igor is collecting the information, because as part of the onboarding, when we pull information from the HR systems, we have a benchmarking team whose sole purpose is mapping levels and positions to the Ravio framework. So that might be a reason why you see some differences and why you can't compare the numbers one by one. But Ravio data definitely supports the finding that you have, Igor.
Yeah, and it's also because, I mean, what we deal with when you deal with anonymous salaries data sets, it's of course self-reported. It's much harder to control it, right? So basically,
There's a question to you. Does the report include only people who were currently employed? Isn't it a survivor bias, excluding those who for example, got laid off?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's an option where I'm also collecting a couple of data points from people that got recently in the last quarter laid off, but this is almost negligible, right? So it's the people that are still full-time employed. I mean, the big majority is. So did I answer this question properly?
You cut off at the end, Igor. If you mind.
Okay, do you still hear me now?
Yes. Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay. So I have some sound issues now. Do you hear me well, Nico?
Yeah, we can hear you. You can keep talking.
Yeah, okay. So I'm just going to keep talking. Okay, so if we go now to the next slide, we have the experience cliff, right? Where we are looking at where does the salary really jump. And what is interesting to see on the slide is that basically it is a really nice bump in the middle section, right? So that we see that the seniors, and this is also pretty logically, then they increase their salary jump. So that's roughly 16,000, so 25% step in one band, and it's a bigger single jump on the whole curve. And this is also a pretty robust sample. So we have 816 people in the 3 to 5 years of experience band, and then 1,550 in the 6 to 10 years experience band. And then it flattens, but this also has a bit of to do with the number of respondents, but it's also this senior threshold where you can really, and we can also see this when companies are hiring, that they usually have problems with getting really good senior people, and there's a lot of demand for seniors. On the other side, on the junior side, especially currently in Berlin, it seems like there's not so much possibilities, especially if juniors just entering the market. So competition is definitely fiercest, or the hardest to hire is the people that deliver in the mid section, so that people with enough experience. And this is also it's basically very clear, seen on the charts. And I mean, it's also pretty logical if you think about it, that senior people, in order to keep them, you need to pay them well, but also in order to poach them, you need to pay them well. So I feel this is the good proxy for this topic. Nico, can you now talk a bit about how do you see this mid and senior match, and how does this look in Europe?
More than happy to do that, Igor. For now, we can hear you clearly. We can't see you, but we can hear you clearly. So the chart that we're showing right now is basically the Ravio IC track, P1 through P6, which are individual contributors from junior to principal, and management track from M1 through M5, comparing Berlin against European benchmarks. In our leveling framework, a P3 is probably what you could consider your mid-level individual, typically someone with 5 to maybe 8 years of experience. That can vary a bit depending on the size of the company, if it's a startup, if it's a scale-up, if it's a large enterprise. But at the end of the day, these individuals are operating independently and delivering every solution. Igor, do you mind putting yourself on mute? You have some sound issues. Perfect. So much better. Thank you. So if we're looking at the P3, that's probably the mid-level that you have in your organization. P4 is a senior IC, and the step between a P2 and a P3, and then P3 to P4, if you follow the graph, is where the biggest and absolute salary movements are happening. And that is seconding what Igor just said, that for a certain group of individuals with a certain amount of experience, you have to pay a premium. The important thing to understand here on why this has happened is that employees at a certain level of experience, at P3, P4, it is really tough to lose them. And if you do that from a company perspective, regaining an employee is really expensive. And we all know about the risks and kind of like employer costs of losing talent. The way we argued for P2 or P1 or P2, these individuals are still learning. So from an employee or employer perspective, you're back, Igor. From an employer perspective, it's definitely easier to refill those roles, and the employer costs might be not as expensive as for a P3. Now, if we take a final look on how Berlin tracks compared to the European data, Berlin tracks slightly above the median, and most levels are both on tracks, which is consistent with what we saw in the last section. But being above the European median doesn't mean being above the relevant local market for a specific role, as we have just seen that Berlin is paying a premium. So when you start benchmarking, you need to benchmark against the right comparator set. That's definitely a key takeaway for all companies. And with that, Igor, I'd hand it over back to you to speak a bit about the AI hype and if AI engineers are still earning a pay premium.
Yeah, I need to apologize. Now suddenly my computer works. So I guess now you hear me, Nico, right?
Yeah, I can hear you. And one more thing, because I just opened the chat, sorry. We do have information on OTE salaries for sales executives as well. It's not part of the report today, but there's a report from Ravio released on compensation trends for 2026, and we definitely tackle the salaries for sales executives as well. So happy to follow up with you, Lisa, after, or we can drop it in the chat for everybody to download the report as well. Okay, I think we lost Igor again. Pleasure, Lisa. Okay, let's give it a second, and if not, I'll cover for Igor until he's back. Yeah, I think let's move on to the next slide, and I'll cover for Igor until he's back. So what we now can see on top of the table is basically separation from pay based on the different positions that you have. I'm just opening up his slides on mine as well to get a better overview about what we're looking at. And the way he structured it is, obviously you can see the control group on the right hand side for all of the employees. Are you back, Igor?
Am I back?
Yeah, you're back. So happy for you to take over.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry about this technical mess. So where are we now? Sorry.
I just started the slide and gave an overview, but happy for you to take it away again and give a proper overview.
So we are looking at the role slide, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, just give me a second. I need to. Yeah. So basically, in this, what we do each year, we group the employees in different groups of roles, right? So this year, for the first time, I introduced also AI group, because it's like there's a big hype on the AI part, and what we see this year, that the AI is oh, sorry, now I need to I'm gonna turn off my camera. Yeah, so basically what the point of this slide was that the Berlin tech pay stretches 2.5 points. So we have, of course, a big difference between companies that are or jobs that are paying less in the terms of. Okay, just hold on. I just need to give me a moment. Sorry, Nico, can you continue with your slide?
Yeah, of course. I can also speak. Yeah, okay. Let's speak about
okay,
the
or maybe you can just speak about this. Sorry, yeah, just go ahead.
Yeah, let me figure your things out, and I'll speak a bit about your side. Can we go back to the slide that Igor? Yes, perfectly. So to be able to compare the answers that Igor got through his survey, he started to group employees. He started to group the positions that the participants of the survey shared with him into like a bit more like broader job profiles. That's basically how you do benchmarking, to try to find a large job profile. For example, software engineers, legal and compliance. He as well has data scientists, product management, strategy and business development. On the right-hand side, you can see the control group, and you can see how the median gross salary is distributed over these different set of roles. What we can see based on the last findings as well is that engineering leadership is definitely getting a pay premium. The reason why is that obviously you need to have a certain amount of skills, a certain amount of years of experience to be able to be a senior engineering leadership. And specifically for Berlin, these, as well as legal and compliance and AI and machine learning engineers, are the ones that receive the highest pay. The reason for AI and machine learning engineers, you could probably argue that this is not as specific as it could be if we have computer vision, if we have certain very dedicated AI roles. It would be really interesting to see how that differs if you have a bit more granular setup. But for now, what we can see in the data from Igor is that everything related to AI, or the technology and skill set that you need to perform these jobs, is getting a pay premium. And if we move over to the Ravio data, that's basically supported by our findings as well. It's basically not a Berlin story. If you look at the information, it's a European one. So the AI premium is showing up everywhere. We have data, and Berlin is sitting right in the middle of it. The chart that we're currently looking at is showing a mid-level IC, showing benchmarks for 5 high-volume roles, ranging from software engineering, AI and machine learning, data engineering, data science, and product management, and then comparing Berlin versus Europe. If we look at Berlin, we can see that Berlin is above the European median for all 5. The largest gap is in software engineering, where Berlin P3 software engineers earn roughly 80K against a European median of 63K, which is quite a substantial amount, which is roughly 28%, or you could argue 1/3, which obviously is a significant difference between the pay. So every software engineer who is currently employed in Berlin, congratulations, you definitely earned your premium. If we look at data engineering, we can see that Berlin is roughly at 78,000 versus Europe at 68,000, which is above 14%. So we can see the more we go to the right that the gap narrows for data science and product management. But in general, people at a certain seniority level in Berlin are still getting paid on a premium. Now, if we take that to AI specifically, like I said, the premium is real, and most likely it's not going away quickly. The reason might be that the number of companies that are in need of AI machine learning skills has grown much faster than its talent supply. That gap will probably take years to close, and until it does, companies are paying up. What we can see in Ravio is that with our constantly refreshes, that the data is still consistent, although you could argue that the initial hype 6 to 12 months ago might decreased a bit, but our data shows different. So what that means from a practical challenge view for reward teams is that if you look at AI specific roles, it's really hard to benchmark them. So there are still probably a couple of positions where it might be a bit easier to benchmark them. You don't have to check them as often as AI or, let's say, tech specific roles. But for these AI featured roles, it's probably worth checking them probably every 3 to 6 months. Ideally working with a real-time data provider and not relying on survey data, but that's really up to you depending how good and how much money you actually have available as well to invest into pay data. Igor, are you back?
Yeah, I am. Yeah. So yeah, now the next slide, we're going to talk about the gender pay gap, which is, I think this is a very interesting topic, and it's also a very sad topic, because I mean, what is also very interesting on this topic is that always when I talk about it, especially on online, I usually get men complaining about it. It's a very interesting perspective, but we have a gender gap of 16.6% raw, which is basically 70,000 versus 85,000. And this is 15,000 a year, which is a bit narrower than 25, which was 20%, but it's basically the same problem, is just a bit smaller font. And what is also important to mention here is that the controlled gap, right? If we control for experience, role, family, seniority, and company size, this gap significantly decreases. So from 14.9% in 2025 to 6.6%. And this is it is very robust thing. And if we ran the same methodology as in 26 on the 25 data, so the last year data would also give 7.6, so also about half. So if you compare controlled versus non-controlled gap, there is a big difference. But of course, gap is a very sensitive topic. But in general, regardless of which way you look at it, is that female or women are paid less than men. And this is, of course, even if you take, okay, if you say the best example would then be 6.6, which is this honest, okay, by the same experience, same seniority, same, even in the same roles, right? So in engineers, company size, women still roughly earn 6% or almost 7% less. So I think if you compare the data from last year, it did improve a bit. But again, this could be also because the sample is larger, and it's very hard, again, on this anonymous data set to do comparisons. But I think if I would say now, that women are definitely paid less than men for the same work, I think I wouldn't be wrong. Even though if sometimes this is, especially for some men, it's, I think, really hard to take, and I think there is a lot of room for improvement here. Also, we see on the salary, on the role reports that I did, we also see this gap is basically consistent throughout all roles that we have, right? So we have 18 particular roles reports, and there is not a single case where women would be earning more than men, and this can be in marketing, whichever role we look at. So I mean, might be based on the data in the salaries, in the salary trends. It seems like stuff is improving, and we will see also next year with the salary transparency, or this year already, but there is still some room to go. Yeah. So how does this look like in Europe, Nico?
Yes, Igor. One question that came up, can you maybe elaborate a bit if the numbers that you evaluated is adjusted pay gap or unadjusted? Based on my understanding, it's unadjusted because you didn't take into consideration like seniority level and
Yeah, there's two numbers, right? One is unadjusted 17.6, and there is a controlled one where it's 6.6, where I took into consideration experience, role, family, seniority, and company size. So it is a bit of both, but this one, what you see on the chart, is unadjusted. Yeah.
Amazing. I hope this answers your question, Andra. Before we jump into the Ravio side on that one, Igor, and give you an overview about Berlin against Europe, just wanted to share a couple of information on the methodology note before I jump into the Ravio data. The numbers that you're about to see are raw, unadjusted pay gap figures, so the same type as Igor's 70.6%. They're not controlled for factors like role or seniority. So these two sets of data are measuring different things, and it's worth keeping the distinction in mind as we go through. With that said, let's have a look at the numbers. As we can see that the pattern is consistent across Europe, and it's consistent at every level. Looking at the Ravio data by department and split between managers and professionals, we can see that no department in European tech reports a raw gap below 8%, which, like you said, Igor, is really sad. So I also had I think it's probably 6 to 9 months ago, where I did a post on this topic, and at the end of the day, I had tons of men arguing why this exists. It's always a bit interesting who actually takes on to post and comment on posts like this. So I definitely second what you said. But now coming back onto what we can see is, yeah, so the gap is confined to one function on the market. It's structural. If we look at finance and commercial departments, they sit at the top. Having OTE data might also be an interesting one that we can actually next time take into consideration, and when we speak about commercial roles, also show OTE data. But what we can see is that with raw manager level gaps around 20% for those two departments, engineering and marketing are closer to the middle, but the direction is the same everywhere. Women are earning less than men in every function we measure at both the IC and management track. It's a consistent pattern. One thing I'd like to add, and second what Igor said, is the control gap. The 6.6% figure is generally useful, but it's easy to misread. When we control for role, family, seniority level, we are holding constant factors that are themselves partly an outcome of the problem. Usually, women are underrepresented in senior roles, which is a more structural thing, also showcased by the European Pay Transparency Directive, which hopefully will now solve this. And maybe one more thing from a practical standpoint for people in reward roles, the pay equity is increasingly moving from a culture conversation to a compliance one. So if you don't have the EU Pay Transparency Directive on your radar yet, it might be worth looking into it to be able to actually comply with the rules guided from the EU, depending on the size of your organization. There are plenty of vendors out there that could support you, or you can do it as Igor and play around with the numbers, do some sort of regression analysis to get an overview about how you're currently comparing internally with your pay equity data to potentially the market and implement certain measures to tackle this issue. Igor, last part.
Yeah, last slide. We are looking a bit who wants to leave. I introduced this question last year already. How likely people are to leave their job in this year? So it's 2023, And I mean, everyone is talking about crisis, right, in Berlin, but the number of people that are likely or very likely to change job in 26 is about 2% up from last year. So last year it was a bit lower. And basically what this means, the third of Berlin tech is actively looking around, or they would probably go, even though the market is, everyone says it's terrible. And it's interesting because this attrition or the wish to leave would usually fall, right, when the hiring is slow. But I think here, especially senior people, might still be really open to change. And what's also interesting, or not interesting, it's pretty obvious that 45%, roughly a bit above 45% people, respondents name significantly higher compensation, so 20+% as the first reason to move, right? So this is more than 3 times the next answer, which is, for example, career growth at 12%. And what's probably connected is because 45% didn't get any raise last year, and another 37% just got 1 to 5%, so that people are like, okay, I think if you're not gonna pay me a bit more, I'm just gonna leave, or I would be open to leaving. So I see there's a bit of a, it's an interesting aspect, especially because everyone, we are also all the time hearing about a lot of crisis mode. And of course, what's also very clear is that if you stay put, it's always worse than if you change jobs, right? So the larger, the more jobs you change, the higher your salary will rise. So I think that a lot of people on this 33% are also thinking in this direction. Okay, so look, if I can't get a raise in this company, maybe if I would think about moving, then I could get a raise. And I think especially senior people, they will be doing well, even in this market. And what's also interesting is that only 37% of people, so that's on 5-point scale, that voted 4 to 5, only 37% are satisfied in the current job. And yeah, so the workforce is not really loving it. And the most exposed group, also interesting, is 5 to 8 year senior individual contributors, right? So these are the people that are most likely to jump, or they would be interested in jumping so that they can do a shift to the next stage in the salary gap, in the salary band. So yeah, how about Nico? How about Ravio? Is this 33% surprising, or how does this look like when you look at the data?
Before I answer this question, there were 2 more questions. So one is if we clarify what an AI engineering position actually is, and that is a really great question because it showcases some of the issues you might have when trying to find benchmarks on, let's say, LLMs or on the free web. It's like, do you actually compare apples by apples just because it's actually the same position title? So right now we didn't specify what an AI engineering position actually is. Based on what we do at Ravio, and our AI engineer would be somebody who is building AI functionalities and LLMs, not an engineer who's using AI on the side of his job and potentially back-end or front-end technique kind of like capabilities. So the question maybe to you, Igor, or something next as some sort of feedback for the reporting is just having some sort of like definition line on what you actually mean by the different positions to showcase.
Yeah, so I have on the website, I have these mappings described, right? Which, because when I need, for example, software engineers, right? There's a group called software engineers, and of course, when people submit their job positions, they can write whatever. It's the only free field in the survey. So then I need to manually map all these positions to the particular roles, right? So you can see, and the person who's asked this, I can't see any chats. You can also mail me and I will give you an exact mapping which roles exactly went to the AI engineering, so that you can see. But of course, this is, I can't even look it up. Sorry, I'm a complete technical, in a technical black hole now. so I can't even look anything up now. But yeah, so I have very clear mapping, so all the roles that are submitted are then always mapped to the category or the role family that fits best to the group. Yeah. And there was another question you said.
Maybe it's an interesting thing that we can follow up with, sharing the link to your website where people can actually see how the mapping worked. The other question was kind of related to the first one, is what kind of roles are actually included in this data set? And I think you briefly touched on it for sure. I mean, counting all of the roles that are currently part of it might be a bit too long to answer. But if we speak about product management or data science, it's anything that is related to these roles or
Yeah.
within this department. Please, Igor.
Yeah, so how the survey is designed, it's, as I said, there's a department question, but there's also a question about what is your role, right? So if you're product manager, you will fall into product management group, right? So there's literally any, like I got 4,000 job titles, and then all of these job titles are mapped in the best fitting category, or if they don't fit, they fall out into other category.
Got it. Thank you so much, Igor. And now coming back to your initial question on if it I just wanted to give a comment as well. And I think speaking to a lot of recruiters over my time working at Ravio is that at some point when you reach a certain seniority level and have a certain level of experience, people actually tend to look at tenure as well. So they don't hire somebody who probably jumped businesses every year, because you're gonna being quite a risk hire, and it probably raises a couple of red flags on why this person never stayed longer for 12 months. So although it makes definitely sense to change providers if you want to have a steep increase in your salaries, it's not always the only solution that you have. But coming back to your question, it really doesn't surprise me at all. So when you combine the race data that you just shared, we can see that 4 and 5 people effectively falling behind in real terms. With the satisfaction split, what you'd expect to see is exactly that the workforce that's quietly shopping, especially on a certain seniority level, most likely between 5 to 8 years of experience. What Ravio data is basically showing is that from a company level, that it is really important on how you position yourself when you look at pay. Is, do you want to sit relative to the market for a given role, level, or location, or do you tend up to pay above the market to actually incentivize employees slash recruitees to come in and work for your business? It's a common philosophy question that nobody can answer for you. There are consultants out there that can help you with, but it's definitely worth, from a company perspective, investing time and actually resources into what's our company philosophy and why. Now, what that basically means is that when you, from a company perspective, says we pay competitively, the question that you want to ask yourself is, competitively against what? Against a survey from 2 years ago, against a broader European market, when most of your competition for talent might be local in Berlin. We just learned that they pay a premium. Do we want to pay against P3 benchmarks when you're actually trying to hire somebody who's more senior or more junior? So all of these distinctions matter really when you think about your comp decisions and what could potentially go wrong and what effect this might have for your employer at the end of the day, or for your people team. Because the cost of losing an employee, we all know these stats from McKinsey and all of these other consultancies, they're sometimes really tough to calculate. But at the end of the day, I don't need to explain all the people on the call here probably how high these costs might be. So it's definitely worth investing time and resources to build out a clear comp philosophy to ensure that your retention rate is going down, because we just learned that pay is still one of the number one reasons why employees leave their company. So if that's something that you can take away, compensation management could be and will be an influencing factor for you to most likely bring down your retention risk, especially for employees on with an experience from 5 to 8 years, basically your mid-level, who potentially build up the company for you. So that was it in terms of the findings from Igor's report, from the Ravio report. Again, really excuse for the technical difficulties. We will now open up the floor for any kind of questions that you have. Feel free to drop them in the chat. If there's nothing left, we will follow up with a couple of answers from our end, sharing the report from Igor, as well as sharing the report from the Ravio side. But I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you so much for staying on the call for the last 40 minutes. If you have any questions, feel free to now ask them in the chat.
Yeah, and I also need to apologize. It's the technical difficulties is my fault. It's not Ravio's fault. Yeah, so I'm sorry about that.
I'd say let's give it around like 5 minutes, and if there's no chats, we can then wrap it up. Igor, one question that came up, or some sort of feedback from Jake, and I know you have it in your report, is he was basically saying it would be interesting for the 2027 survey to map out the pay gap based on knowledge of the local language. For example, the average pay for someone with an A1, A2, B1.
Yeah, in fact,
you already have that in the report, so happy for you to take that away and already answer it.
yeah, that's actually already in report, but I think the German, I was also, basically the question was, what's your level of German from A1 to C2 or native, or basically non-existent to native? And I was surprised that, and it's also very logical that people that are not really good in German, they are paid more because that's the people that are basically coming to Berlin for this particular well-paying jobs in software engineering. And a lot of jobs which are on the lower side of salaries, like public administration or marketing, or these creative jobs where a lot of Germans are working, right? Those are then pulling the average down. So if you would just if you just read the report, you would think, okay, it makes no sense for me to learn German. But I think there is an effect. It's very useful, and the data is a bit old, right? So people that joined 3 years ago, they maybe didn't need German, so it was all good. But now companies are really picky, and they go much more with the the requirements for language are higher. So I have this data, but I wouldn't look too much into it, to be honest.
Interesting. Thanks, Igor. I definitely know from conversation that I'm having that it might be a bit different for sales or account management perspectives, because at the end of the day, if you speak more languages, you can obviously serve more territories. But that would be maybe an interesting comparison to compare like the wider tech to potentially like commercial roles when it comes down to language questions. One more question that was raised by Marco is that he basically was asking how international companies and their cross-country hiring might influence pay scales for in-demand jobs such as AI specialists or LLM engineers. Do you have any insights on that, or potentially your own perspective, Igor, since you have been in the field for some time as well?
You mean like if companies would hire in Berlin but from outside, or
How, let's say, companies from the US or Spain or let's say Sweden, they look for talents all over Europe, and how this is actually increasing pay for these on-demand / AI roles, because usually they can potentially either relocate or work remotely. And with this global search, if this is driving up salaries for these specific roles.
I think for sure. If you're really good, then especially I think in the senior, IC senior band, this for sure has an impact. But I don't know, from the data, it's really hard to see this stuff, right? Because also comparisons year over year. So I think on your side, on Ravio's side, I think you might have better visibility, especially if you look at certain roles in certain cities and how they moved over years. Because I don't have this visibility, especially because the data is completely anonymous. So I can't really say, okay, this person last year was earning that much and next year that much. So it's hard to say.
Got it. So the short answer would be yes. It's definitely driving up numbers. What we can see is that if you think about how companies over the last 5 to 10 years built out hubs like Portugal or Lisbon or in Poland, so all of these, let's say, tech hubs, all employees there receive a pay premium. It's still comparably less, or it was less than, let's say, an engineer in the UK or Germany. So you went through Portugal, Poland, Ukraine, like basically Eastern Europe, to find the talent and pay them less. But at the end of the day, this resulted in all of the other employees trying to A, get more money, B, like the whole average of this specific group of employees got higher and higher. So at the end of the day, it's definitely driving up numbers for certain locations, but not for all of them. What we as well see is that like companies from the US, they just tend to pay higher as well in Europe. So this is also kind of like skewing the numbers from time to time, and it definitely has an influence, which is why it always comes back to your compensation philosophy, right? If you have, let's say, a pot of gold where nobody's really caring about how much money you spend, it's really easy for you to pay what the market is asking. But when you have a clear comp philosophy, it makes things really fair and objective. So you end up, or you don't end up having so many negotiations and edge cases, which just makes things more complex. But coming back to your question, yes, it's definitely resulting in pay premium specifically for high in demand roles. Hope this answers your question. That was quite a long answer. All right. I think there are no more questions. Thank you so much for joining us for today. We hope it was insightful. If you have a minute to share some feedback whenever we text you, send you an email, I'm more than happy to receive it. Anything in terms of like tech stack, in terms of, pronunciation, whatever, feel free to share it. Anything of content that you missed that you potentially want to have in the next session, let us know. We always happy to hear it. And if not, have a great evening. No, have a great afternoon. Will we get a short summary of the webinar? We can definitely draft one up. So yes, you get a short summary, and also we will be sharing all of the resources that we just spoke about today, and even a bit more as a present. So thank you so much for your time, Igor. A couple of more.
Yeah, thank you also from my side. I'm especially sorry that in the middle I completely disappeared because of the technical issues. So thank you for your patience. Thank you for staying with us. We're gonna send some links, and yeah, I also wish you a very, very nice afternoon wherever you are.
Last question that came just in before we ended the conversation from David on your question here, Igor. Are the salaries skewed because handpicked people show more initiative, are more informed, and probably paid better?
I don't know. Of course, there's always people who earn a lot, they want to share it, and people who don't earn a lot, they don't want to share it. So that's for sure some aspect of this is in the data. But whenever I compare it, also when you compare it with Ravio, you see that the data is pretty solid, right? It's very robust. It's also not just handpicked community, because we were getting responses like to get to this 4,600. I also used other channels. So it's like, I think it's a very, very, very good insight into Berlin tech. Probably skewed up for sure, but it's still valuable. And I wouldn't say that the handpicked crowd is really, really influencing so much, because when you take everything together, put it in a big box, it sort of evens out all the biases a bit. But yeah, I think it's a very, very good insight into Berlin. Yeah.
Thanks, Igor. I think this answers the question, but I like it as well. I was like, yeah, interesting. Definitely a good point. Yeah, with that, I'd say thank you so much. Have a great afternoon, and thank you so much for joining. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks.
Take care. All about